Robert Vickers had always felt that there was something wrong with his left leg, even though the limb was perfectly healthy. Vickers felt that his left leg was superfluous, that it just did not belong to him, and that he should have been born without it. By the time he was 30 years old, Vickers had decided that he needed to get rid of the unwanted limb once and for all. So one morning he bought a large quantity of dry ice and submerged the leg into it. Unfortunately for Vickers, the doctors managed to save the limb. Eventually, he met the psychiatrist who had treated several other similar patients and who arranged for his leg to be amputated. His only regret was that he hadn't done it sooner. Welcome to the podcast where we dive into the pages of popular books in the life sciences with the writers who made them happen, from new releases to timeless classics. This week, I'm really pleased to welcome Moheb Costandi, a seasoned science writer who's been exploring and writing about the brain for nearly 20 years. Moheb studied neuroscience at University College London, and his work has appeared in outlets like the BBC, The Guardian, and the journals Nature and Science. He's also the author of 3 books, including Body Am I, The New Science of Self-Consciousness, which we'll be diving into today. Welcome, Mo.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Now, this book is all about how our brain perceives the body and how it creates our conscious experience of it. We often think of the brain and body as separate, but they are in fact deeply intertwined, so much so that the very idea of consciousness without a body is, for many, a non-starter. This is also why some argue that large language models like ChatGPT could never truly be conscious. And after reading this book, you really come away with a sense of how our experience of our body is not reality, but rather a construction of the brain. Just as the brain builds our perception of the outside world, such as the colors we see, so it constructs our bodily experience. And you take readers on a remarkable journey of how this construction can break down, giving rise to such weird and wacky phenomena as phantom limbs, alien hands, and Alice in Wonderland syndrome. And today, I hope we can give our listeners a glimpse of that journey and reveal just how wonderfully strange the human mind can be. So to set the stage a bit, being conscious isn't just about experiencing the outside world. It also involves self-consciousness, our awareness of ourselves within that world. And a key part of self-consciousness is bodily awareness, or how we experience our own bodies. And in your book, you explain that bodily awareness is actually made up of 2 core components. And could you start by breaking down what those are?
So, bodily awareness consists largely of a sense of body ownership and a sense of agency. Those simply refer to the sense that one's body belongs to one's self and that one is in control of one's body and is responsible for its actions. And those sound like quite trivial ideas, but in fact there are extremely complex brain mechanisms underlying the senses of ownership and agency, and these mechanisms can break down in a wide variety of neurological and psychiatric conditions, leading to all sorts of bizarre behaviors and experiences.
Right. So these 2 core components you mentioned, body ownership, the sense that our body belongs to us, and agency, the sense that we control our body and actions. Interestingly, while these 2 parts are linked, they actually function separately. And this is illustrated by neurological conditions that can disturb one without affecting the other. And you talk about a condition that goes by the fancy name somatoparaphrenia. And someone with this condition might have full control over a limb, but insist it's not theirs, as if it belongs to someone else. And on the flip side, in something called alien hand syndrome, which we'll talk about, people feel like one of their hands is acting on its own, controlled by some external force. And they recognize the hand is theirs, so body ownership is intact, but they feel like they've lost agency over it. So it's a fascinating illustration of how these two components can be actually separated. So the neurologist Henry Hedi, who features in your book, famously described diseases as nature's experiments on man, and saw neurological disorders as opportunities to understand how the brain and body are interconnected. So let's go into the first of today's experiments on man, phantom limb. Maybe we can just start by defining what it is.
Or phantom limb is the experience of the vast majority of amputees, that their missing limb is still attached to their body, and this usually involves very vivid sensation that the missing limb is still present and even more real than their remaining limbs. And often these phantom sensations can be very painful. So the amputee can experience severe or excruciating pain that they perceive is arising from their missing limb.
Right. And this was actually described during the American Civil War in the 19th century. A physician by the name of Mitchell observed soldiers who experienced these strange sensations in their amputated limbs. So he wrote that the sufferer who has lost a leg gets up in the night to walk, or he tries to rub or scratch it. And as you say, what's ironic is that the person can often be more conscious of their missing limb than of their existing body parts. And Mitchell also wrote that the amputated breast is often felt as if present, and the lost penis is subject to phantom erections. And you mentioned a 2007 study which found that 14 out of 82 breast cancer patients experienced phantom breast sensations 2 years after mastectomy. And then there's another case report that you write about, published in 1950. A Boston surgeon described an older man whose phantom penis sensations were so vivid that the man had to look under his clothes to be sure that his penis was in fact missing. Could you just talk to us a bit about this study in 2008 of transgender individuals on phantom breast and penis sensations?
Essentially, what it found was that male to female transgender people are less likely to experience phantom penis sensations after having the penis surgically removed, while female to male transgender people are less likely to experience phantom breasts after having breasts surgically removed. So that suggests that the mental picture of the body may be different in transgender people and could be more aligned to the gender that they identify as rather than the one they were born as.
So you mean it could be a kind of a mismatch between the body and its representations in the brain that could contribute to gender dysphoria.
Exactly.
And you mentioned one fascinating case from 1964 of an 11-year-old girl who was born missing both forearms and hands, and who reported very distinct and intense phantoms, which she had experienced for the first time at the age of 6, and who thereafter had the feeling of two completely normal hands placed about 15 centimeters below the stumps. And the study says that she was able to differentiate and to freely move all of her fingers in school. And even she had learned to solve simple arithmetic problems by counting with her fingers, just as other children did by placing her phantom hands on the table to count the outstretched fingers one by one.
This would suggest that genetics also plays a role, and that these maps or body maps or representations, we're born with them.
Right. And studies find that about 20% of people born without limbs experience phantom sensations. And as you say, this would suggest that our brains may have a built-in body map shaped not just by experience, but by genetics. And people have been working on ways to relieve phantom pain.
One very, very simple form of therapy was developed by neurologists called Ramachandran at the University of California in San Diego. And this so-called mirror box therapy simply involves the amputee placing their remaining limb into a cardboard box that has mirrors attached to 3 of its sides, and this creates the simple illusion. It creates a reflection of the remaining limb in the position where the missing limb would be, and that very simple manipulation is apparently quite effective in alleviating phantom pain, and we still don't know exactly why that happens. One thing it does tell us is that the sense of vision is very, very important for how we perceive our bodies, and this new visual input is somehow interfering with the processing of the altered body map.
Yeah, the importance of visual input is a recurring theme, isn't it? And of course, the illusion breaks down if the patient looks away from the mirror. So I guess we can't really talk about this subject without talking about the rubber hand illusion, perhaps the most famous of these illusions. Can you just describe what it is?
And so this experiment was first described in 1998 in a very brief letter to the journal Nature, and it described this manipulation where they had their subjects sitting at a desk with one hand on the tabletop and another hand out of sight, and with a rubber hand, much like this one, on the tabletop in front of them in a position where their other hand might be. And then when the experimenter simply uses 2 paintbrushes to apply synchronous brush strokes to the rubber hand and the hand out of sight, and so they're looking at the rubber hand and seeing these brushstrokes being applied to the fingers of the rubber hand, but they feel identical brushstrokes applied to their actual hand. And in most people, that is enough to create the illusion that the rubber hand actually belongs to them and is a part of their body. And this can be tested in various ways. The experimenter actually attacks the rubber hand with a hammer or a knife, and the participant will react as if their own body is being attacked. Not only that, the follow-up experiments show that during this illusion, the actual hand, the participant's real hand, its temperature drops by fractions of a degree, and it may even become slightly less sensitive to painful stimuli, which suggests that the brain is actually, not only is it's incorporating the rubber hand into its representation of the body, but it's actually disowning the actual hand, or at least neglecting it.
Yeah, and I think speaking to the disowning of it, the histamine reactivity, a key step in the immune response, increases as well.
Yes.
Yeah, well, it seems that we may need to revise the saying to know something like the back of your hand, because it seems we don't know the back of our hand very well at all. And I think it's just a wonderful illustration of how malleable the brain can be, how a rubber hand that you'd only just seen can suddenly feel like yours within minutes. What I didn't know at all were all these variations on the rubber hand illusion. And I think there's even the rubber tail illusion.
Yeah, that was done by a group in Japan, a variation of the rubber hand illusion performed in mice using a rubber tail.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it? Stroking the real and fake tails synchronously appears to con these mice into thinking that the fake tail is theirs.
So I've used this to perform the rubber hand illusion myself on dozens of people, including my own children when they were younger. My son even started doing it on his little sister as well. I had one or two people actually fall out of their chair when I smashed the rubber hand with a hammer or a knife, and I invented my own variation when I was describing the illusion to people in a pub or a bar, and didn't have my rubber hand handy. Sorry for the pun, but then I would use a second person's real hand instead of a rubber hand. But I suppose that would more accurately be called the hand swap illusion rather than the rubber hand illusion. But I often manage to induce this illusion that the sensations they were feeling were actually arising from the other person's hand on the tabletop in front of them, rather than their actual hand under the table on their knee. I've also done this in the pub situation, and with a black man and a white woman, or vice versa. So I've transferred this sense of ownership of the hand across race and sex simultaneously.
That's fascinating. Well, this speaks to the body swap illusion, which we'll be getting onto. And again, another amazing example of just how adaptive and flexible the brain can be. So another disorder that you write about is body integrity identity disorder. And at the start of the show, I read out the famous case of the Australian Robert Vickers, who felt that his left leg didn't belong to him. An extremely rare condition. I think fewer than 500 cases have been reported to date.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, it's incredible to read about individuals who go to the extent of blowing off their legs with a shotgun in order to feel whole again. And I think as you write, people who've undergone this kind of amputation regard themselves not as disabled, but as transabled. Could you just define for us what body integrity identity disorder is?
It appears to be a neurological condition in which the sufferer has a burning desire to amputate a perfectly healthy limb. In the the book, I actually describe my hypothesis for how this might arise during development. There's we could call it a critical period during which the brain is generating maps of the body based on sensory experiences, and that during this critical period, the sensory input from an arm or a leg is cut off so that the brain doesn't receive any sensory information from the affected limb during this time that it's generating its body maps. And as a result, the affected limb isn't incorporated into the brain's map of the body, and later on in life that creates this lack of sense of ownership over the limb.
And I think there's some evidence to suggest that the thickness of the cortex on the surface of the brain in a region of the brain called the parietal lobule is thinner in people with this condition than in controls. And the thinner this part of the cortex is, the stronger the desire for amputation.
Yes, that's right. The idea is that the representation of the affected limb is perturbed.
And again, there are reports of this condition going back centuries. In 1785, the French surgeon Jean-Joseph Sue describes an Englishman who was in love with an amputee and wanted to become an amputee himself. And he offered a French surgeon 100 guineas to amputate his healthy leg. And the surgeon refused because he didn't have the right equipment, but then performed the operation at gunpoint. The surgeon later received a payment for the amputation from this gentleman, along with a letter stating, "You have made me the happiest of all men by taking away from me a limb which put an invincible obstacle to my happiness." And there's another condition which appears to involve loss of knowledge of the body or parts of the body.
Hemiplegia specifically means paralysis on one side of the body. But in some stroke patients, this is accompanied by what neurologists call anosagnosia, which means a lack of knowledge. The patient will deny that a part of their body is paralyzed. This may arise because there's a breakdown in communication, essentially. Even though there's a disturbance of our bodily awareness, that disturbance isn't being communicated to other regions or networks of the brain involved in conscious awareness.
Right, because, if you ask some of these people who have this condition, for example, a paralyzed left arm or leg, and you ask them to move it, they will only move the healthy arm or leg, or not at all. But at the same time, they're convinced that they actually have carried out the task of moving the paralyzed limb.
Yeah, essentially a lack of self-awareness.
And so moving on now to the story of Wilder Penfield. Now, our understanding of how the brain represents the body owes much to this Canadian neurosurgeon in the 20th century. And can you just tell us a little bit about what he did and how he came to create this map?
Penfield developed a technique for operating on the brains of patients while they remained fully conscious. He worked with patients with drug-resistant epilepsy who'd have neurosurgery as a last resort. Probably his most important discovery was that the brain contains very organized maps of the body. So when he stimulates this region of the cortex, the patient would report a sensation in their shoulder, and then when he moved the electrodes down a millimeter or two, they would report a sensation further down their arm, and so on. And this organization is referred to as a topographic organization, where the adjacent body parts are mapped onto adjacent patches of brain tissue.
Yeah, and it looks as though the brain contains multiple different body maps. For example, a more recently discovered area in a different part of the brain at the edge of the occipital and temporal lobes contains a detailed map that activates specifically when a person looks at or moves their own body parts, like their arms or legs. And this map is organized similarly to Penfield's homunculus, with extra attention, I believe, to the arms. But unlike the homunculus, it doesn't give extra space to the face.
Yeah, Penfield focused on the sensory and motor regions of the brain, but we know now there are multiple maps in the brain. There are maps in the occipital cortex towards the back of the brain, and also in the parietal lobe, which is thought to be particularly important for integrating sensory information from different modalities. These maps are essential for not just how we perceive our bodies, but also how we use our bodies. So the brain relies on these maps not only to localize touch to the body, but also to plan its movements.
And studies also showed that these representations can change.
Brain scanning studies show that learning to play the violin, it involves an expansion of the finger areas of the brain map.
But disuse of a limb can have the opposite effect. Wearing a cast, for example, for a few weeks can shrink a cortical representation of the affected body part, reducing its activity in response to touch and impairing touch acuity. Now, brain injuries can sometimes cause unusual changes in the brain's body map. And I think we have to mention this particular story because this is something straight out of the X-Files. In 2009, researchers in Switzerland studied a rare case of a 64-year-old woman who developed a phantom third arm after a stroke on the right side of her brain. And then 4 days after the stroke, she described seeing a pale, ghostly arm extending from her left elbow. And she could trigger it at will, move it, and use it to touch her body, and even felt relief when she scratched an itch with it.
This seems to be a case where the damage that occurred as a result of the stroke somehow reduplicated a part of this woman's body map, so that she experienced this sensation of a third arm extending from her left elbow.
Yeah. And when researchers scanned her brain 3 weeks later, they found that when she imagined moving her phantom arm or scratching an itch with it, it activated the same brain areas responsible for her real movements and sensations, as well as visual areas, which matched her report that she could move and see her phantom limb and scratch an itch with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think her unusual third arm gradually faded away over 4 months as feeling of movement returned to her real left arm.
Yeah. It's a really remarkable case study, that one.
And your book is just full of these incredible cases. So another one, mirror touch synesthesia, and so yes, this is when someone sees another person being touched and they experience touch on the corresponding part of their own body. And this is, I think, a really good example of how our senses of sight and touch are closely linked. Nice segue, actually, to the next topic, which is a chapter in your book, Multisensory Integration. You explain very, very clearly, I think, that our senses don't work separately and that they very often combine to create these richer multisensory experiences in our minds.
Yeah, I think most experiences we have involve this process of multi-sensory integration. Eating being an example. You know, if you're given a blue banana, the color of the banana will detract from your experience of eating it and how it tastes to you.
Perhaps the most incredible example of taking advantage of this multisensory integration in the brain is inducing out-of-body experiences in healthy individuals. There's one particular study, I think in 2007. Can you just talk to us about what they did and what they found?
You could think of it as another variation of the rubber hand illusion, but in this case, the participants are wearing a head mounted visual display which shows them the images from a camera held by someone standing behind them. And so, if you can imagine that setup, then what they see in the display is an image of their own body projected out in front of them. And so when touch is applied to their body, they see this touch being applied to the image of themselves that is being projected in front of them. And that can induce this sensation that the illusion, rather, that the sensations they're experiencing are coming from this projected image in front of them, and that can induce an out of body experience.
And you mentioned this hand swap illusion that you improvised in the pub, and there's a full body swap illusion as well.
Yes, so that involves two people standing facing each other wearing these head mounted visual display so that this same manipulation can induce the illusion that the sensations one is feeling are arising from the person standing opposite them.
Right. And so the participant wearing a headset sees their own body from the other person's perspective. And when both of these people are standing facing each other and squeezing each other's hands in sync, the participant feels as if they are inside the other person's body, as if shaking hands with themselves. And this gets even crazier with the Barbie doll illusion, which is another version of the body swap illusion. And participants here wear a headset showing the view from a camera placed over a small doll's body. And when both the doll and the participant are touched in sync, the participant feels as if they've taken on the doll's tiny body. And this also changes how they perceive the world around them. Objects look huge and seem further away. And of course, the reverse happens when they swap into an oversized body. And objects seem much smaller and closer than they actually are. Crazy stuff.
That tells us that our perception of our bodies is very closely linked to how we perceive our environment. When we perceive our bodies to be much larger or smaller than they actually are, our perception of our surroundings changes accordingly.
Right. And so moving on now to proprioception. So this now is the sense of the position and movement of our body and of our limbs, joints and other body parts. And I think was first described in the 19th century. And this sense of position comes from stretch receptors in our joints, muscles, and tendons that can respond to even the smallest movements. But these sensors can be tricked. If activated artificially, they can create a vivid illusion that a limb is moving when it's actually still, and people even adjust their gaze to follow the moving limb as if it's really shifting, and they even feel that it moves into these impossible positions. So this has led people to induce what's known as the Pinocchio illusion.
Yeah, the Pinocchio illusion can be induced by activating the stretch receptors in the elbow while you're touching your nose, and that creates the illusion that your arm is extending and pulling the tip of your nose out with it.
Right. It's incredible. And I think a good example of how important proprioception is in another fascinating case study, this time of a man called Ian Waterman, described by the neurologist Jonathan Cole, who at 19 years of age experienced a rare autoimmune response to the influenza virus, which attacked the sensory neurons from his neck down. And this blocked all touch and proprioceptive signals from his entire body. And so Jonathan Cole writes that he could feel nothing from the neck, nor could he feel his mouth and tongue. Not only couldn't he feel anything to touch, he had no idea of where the various bits of his body were without looking at them. He could not feel anything with his arms, his legs, or his body. That was frightening enough, but he had no awareness of their position either. It wasn't that the muscular power was affected, since he could make an arm move, but he had no ability to control the speed or direction of the movement. Any movement happened in a totally unexpected way. It was pointless to try. There, I think you have a clear illustration of just how important proprioception is. And another crucial sense that often gets overlooked is interoception. So this is messages from our gut, heart, lung, and hormonal system, and our sense of internal body signals like hunger, thirst, heartbeat, the need to breathe, or a full bladder. Now, in your book, you talk about interoception and the theory of William James. So could you just explain for us, give us a taste of his theory for emotions and how they arise?
So interoception is this sensing of the body's internal signals, and essentially William James proposed that emotions basically arise when we interpret the signals arising from inside our body and give them some meaning. So maybe it's best if I read a little quote from his textbook, Principles of Psychology, which was published in the 1890s. My thesis, on the contrary, is that we feel sorry because we cry, angry because we strike, afraid because we tremble, and not that we cry, strike, or tremble because we are sorry, angry, or tearful. Without bodily states following on the perception, the latter would be purely cognitive in form, pale, colourless, destitute of emotional warmth. We might then see the bear and judge it best to run, receive the insult and deem it right to strike, but we could not actually feel afraid or angry.
Fascinating, yeah.
It's a kind of a counterintuitive idea. Darwin had a similar idea, actually, and he argued, for example, that if you're unhappy and you force yourself to smile, that would improve your mood.
And if I'm not mistaken, this actually ties in with some of the illusions that we mentioned earlier. For example, the less accurately people perform the heartbeat perception task, which measures how well people can estimate the number of heartbeats they have per minute, the more susceptible they are to the rubber hand illusion.
Yeah, so there's this idea of interoceptive awareness. So some people are more aware or more sensitive to their internal bodily signals than others, and people with more interoceptive awareness are less susceptible to multisensory illusions or illusions of bodily awareness.
And there's some evidence that supports William James's theory of emotions and how they're based on physical sensations like a quickened heartbeat or tense muscles, which are then interpreted as emotions. For example, alexithymia is a condition where people have difficulty recognizing and describing their emotions. Studies show that people with alexithymia often struggle to accurately perceive their own heartbeat and other internal cues. Well, Mo, I see we're already running out of time, and there's still so much more I'd love to chat about, such as agency, the second component of bodily awareness, this feeling we have of being in control of our body and our actions. And we haven't even touched on other topics like anorexia nervosa and the very exotic Alice in Wonderland syndrome, not to mention how all of this impacts our understanding of consciousness. So I think we're going to have to split this episode into two for our listeners. So stay tuned for part 2 of my conversation with Moheb Costandi. And thank you so much for joining us today, Mo.
Thanks for having me.